Camp Concordia, Kansas, July 1944. The barracks had become like furnaces in the summer swelter, and Hauptmann Clara Naumann wiped the perspiration from her brow as she walked behind Sergeant Williams, heading to a building the Americans referred to as the Recreation Hall. After 3 weeks of being a prisoner, she had started to get used to the surprising amenities of the American facilities, which included flush toilets, hot showers, and 3 daily meals. However, she was completely unprepared for what she would find beyond the simple wooden door. "Ladies," Sergeant Williams declared in his deliberate German, speaking to the 25 female prisoners who were all captured during the retreat from Normandy. "Today, you're going to be introduced to one of America's most cherished summer customs." Clara exchanged a look with the other prisoners. In her previous role as a communications officer for the 12th SS Panzer Division, her training had conditioned her to anticipate interrogation, hardship, and possibly even torture. In stark contrast, she was now in a place that surpassed the quality of the German officers' quarters she had experienced before the war began. Inside, the recreation building was cool, a startling relief from the intense Kansas heat. American soldiers were relaxing at tables, some playing cards, others reading magazines, while radio programs played swing music that mingled with their relaxed laughter. But what brought Clara to a complete standstill was a very large, white cabinet humming softly in a corner. It was surrounded by American staff who were holding what looked like frozen desserts. "My goodness," Greta Hoffman, a radar operator from Hamburg standing next to her, whispered in awe. "Is that what I believe it is?" Sergeant Williams went over to the white cabinet and lifted its lid, showing an inside packed with individually wrapped frozen treats in perfect rows. A cloud of vapor rose from the freezer as the frigid air met the summer warmth, which created an almost enchanting effect, leaving the German women staring in utter disbelief. "Ice cream," Williams proclaimed with clear pride. "Vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry made fresh each week by our camp kitchen staff. Every prisoner is allowed 2 servings a week, and even more when the weather is especially hot." Clara felt her legs go weak. Ice cream, a frozen dessert, had been a rare treat in Germany during peacetime, something only the rich could afford or that was reserved for special events. Throughout the war, such delicacies had disappeared completely, becoming just a distant memory of a more prosperous time. And here, in an American prison camp, enemy captives were being offered multiple weekly servings of a treat that even German generals could not get. "This must be propaganda," she muttered to Greta. "They are trying to make a show of their resources, to make us believe this American abundance is real. Tomorrow they will take it all away and reveal the truth." Yet, even as the words left her mouth, she saw American guards casually picking out ice cream bars for themselves, treating the frozen luxury as something so ordinary, so plentiful, that sharing it with their enemies required no second thought. Sergeant Williams came over with 2 vanilla bars. "Miss Naumann, Miss Hoffman, would you care to try some American ice cream?" The question seemed to hang in the air, a direct challenge to everything they had been led to believe about their captors. The ice cream was cold, sweet, and more delicious than anything Clara had tasted in 5 long years of war. She stood there in the recreation building, holding the wooden stick that had held the vanilla perfection, finding it hard to reconcile this experience with all the stories she had been told about American prison camps and the brutality of the enemy. "How is this possible?" Greta whispered, slowly finishing her own ice cream, savoring it like an impossible treasure. "We are prisoners of war, and they are giving us desserts that vanished from German shops back in 1940. Around them, the other German women were having their own moments of revelation. Maria Becca, who had been a telephone operator in Berlin, sat in a stunned silence after eating a chocolate bar that she swore was better than any pre-war German sweets. Ingrid Weber, a medical assistant from Munich, was carefully inspecting the wrapper, trying to grasp the industrial methods that could make such abundance possible in a time of war. "Sergeant Williams," Clara said, approaching the American supervisor with the same directness that had made her an effective communications officer. "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Miss Naumann. How can you afford this?" she asked, gesturing toward the freezer that continued to hum with mechanical precision. "Ice cream for prisoners while you are fighting a global war? In Germany, even our highest-ranking officers have not seen luxuries like this since the war started." William smiled with what looked like genuine amusement. "Miss Naumann, this is not a luxury in America. This is normal. Every town in Kansas has ice cream shops. Every grocery store has multiple flavors in stock. Children expect to have ice cream at their birthday parties and on summer picnics. The idea was so alien that Clara struggled to comprehend it. An abundance so normal, a luxury so casual, a society so wealthy that providing ice cream to enemy prisoners did not require any special budget or official approval. But the rationing, she insisted. Surely you have shortages, restrictions, and limits on sugar and dairy. We have some rationing, Williams conceded. But it is nothing like what you have experienced in Germany. America's agricultural and industrial power is so great that it can feed our own people, our military, our allies, and yes, even our prisoners, at a standard that most of the world would consider generous. That evening, in the comfortable barracks with their clean beds and proper heating, the German women gathered to talk about their ice cream experience. The conversation was quiet, almost secretive, as if they were discussing state secrets instead of frozen desserts. "I have been thinking," said Maria, who had asked for and received a second serving of ice cream during the afternoon recreation time. "If they can afford to give us ice cream twice a week, what does that say about their actual resources? About their ability to sustain this war?" "It says we never truly understood who we were fighting," Clara replied softly. "We were told that America was a weak and decadent nation, incapable of a sustained military campaign. But a country that gives ice cream to its prisoners is not weak. It is so strong that it can afford to be generous." Through the windows of the barracks they could see the lights of Concordia, Kansas, twinkling in the night. Somewhere in that small American town, families were likely enjoying their evening ice cream. Children were celebrating their birthdays with frozen treats, and the freezers in the stores were filled with flavors that German civilians could hardly remember. For the first time since she had been captured, Clara began to wonder if Germany had been fighting a war that it was destined to lose. 3 days later, Clara found herself assigned to kitchen duty. The American cooks treated her more like an apprentice than a prisoner. The ice cream revelation had been followed by a series of discoveries that continued to challenge her understanding of American society and the German propaganda about the enemy's capabilities. "Today we're making a fresh batch of ice cream," announced Cook Peterson, a cheerful man from Iowa who seemed genuinely happy to teach the German prisoners about American culinary methods. Real vanilla beans, fresh cream from the local dairy farms, and sugar that, while rationed for civilians, is plentiful for military facilities. Clara watched in astonishment as Peterson showed her the industrial ice cream maker, a machine that could produce gallons of the frozen dessert with a mechanical efficiency that was far beyond anything she had seen in German food production facilities. "In Germany," she told Peterson carefully, "we have not had real cream since 1941. Milk is rationed, sugar is nearly impossible to find, and vanilla has not been available since the trade routes were cut off." Peterson paused his preparations, looking at her face with the focused attention of someone trying to understand a completely foreign concept. "No ice cream at all? Not even for special occasions?" "Not even for Christmas," Clara confirmed. "Children might get an orange if they are lucky, or perhaps a small piece of chocolate. But ice cream," she shook her head. "Ice cream is a memory from before the war." "Well," Peterson said with a characteristic American optimism, "then we will just have to make sure you get some extra servings while you are here." As they worked together, preparing the vanilla custard base and discussing the proper freezing techniques, Clara learned more about American food production than she ever had from years of Wehrmacht intelligence briefings. Peterson talked casually about agricultural surpluses, industrial-scale dairy operations, and refrigerated transportation networks that connected farms to cities across vast distances. "My brother's farm in Wisconsin produces enough milk to supply 3 entire counties," he mentioned, while adjusting the ice cream machine. "During peacetime, we actually had a problem with overproduction. Too much food and not enough markets." The idea of overproduction, of having too much instead of too little, was so foreign to Clara that she initially thought she had misunderstood his English. In Germany, scarcity had been a defining feature of civilian life since 1939. Rationing, ersatz substitutes, black market deals, and the constant calculation of the calories and nutrients needed for survival. "Cook Peterson," she said carefully, "may I ask what you know about the conditions in Germany?" About how the German civilians are living during this war? Peterson's expression turned serious. From what we have heard, it is pretty tough. There are food shortages, bombings, and a rationing system that makes our own restrictions seem generous. He paused for a moment. That is part of the reason we are fighting, Miss Noman, so that people everywhere can have enough to eat, so they can enjoy simple pleasures like ice cream without having to worry about where their next meal will come from. As the ice cream machine churned out its vanilla perfection, Clara realized she was witnessing something more significant than the production of a dessert. She was seeing the industrial and agricultural foundation that made American generosity possible. The abundance that allowed them to give ice cream to their enemy prisoners while their own families enjoyed a prosperity that the German leaders had promised but had never been able to deliver. 2 weeks into her kitchen assignment, Clara had become an expert at operating the ice cream machine. She had also learned to prepare the flavors that the German prisoners requested: strawberry, peach, and even some experimental combinations that Cook Peterson encouraged as a form of cultural exchange through dessert innovation. The new prisoners from the July transport do not believe us about the ice cream, Greta reported during their afternoon break. She gestured toward a group of recently captured German women who were sitting at the recreation tables with expressions of sullen defiance. They think we are collaborating with the American propaganda. Clara understood their skepticism. She had felt the same disbelief during her first week, the same assumption that the American kindness was a form of manipulation, that the abundance was an illusion designed to break the prisoners' morale. It was only through the daily exposure to the genuine prosperity of America that she had become convinced that the generosity was real. Bring them to the kitchen tomorrow, she suggested. Let them see the ice cream production process for themselves. The EU diet, quantities of the ingredients, the casual efficiency of the American food preparation. Sometimes you have to witness abundance to believe that it truly exists. That evening, during the time allotted for writing letters, Clara struggled to describe her experiences to her sister in Munich. How could she explain getting ice cream twice a week to someone who was surviving on turnip soup? How could she convey the abundance of America to civilians who celebrated the discovery of a single egg on the black market? She settled for carefully chosen euphemisms. The Americans are treating us well. The food is adequate, and it occasionally includes desserts that remind me of our peacetime celebrations. The censor would approve of such language, but her sister would never be able to grasp the reality behind those modest words. Miss Noman. Sergeant Williams approached her table carrying what looked like official documents. I wanted to discuss something with you. Your English language skills and your experience in the kitchen have impressed the camp administration. We are offering selected prisoners the opportunity to work in civilian establishments in the nearby towns, restaurants, dairy farms, food production facilities. Clara stared at the papers. Work release for enemy prisoners? The idea seemed impossible. Yet she had learned that American generosity often exceeded any reasonable expectations. What kind of work? She asked. Peterson's cousin owns an ice cream parlor in Salina. He is looking for someone with your skills to help with the summer production. You would continue to live at the camp, but you would work 8 hours a day in a civilian facility, earning American wages that you could either save for your post-war repatriation or use for your personal expenses. An ice cream parlor, Clara repeated, finding it hard to process the surreal possibility of a former Wehrmacht officer serving frozen desserts to American civilians. The owner specifically requested someone who understands the production process and who can handle customer service in both German and English. Apparently, Salina has several German-American families who would appreciate a bilingual service. As she considered the offer, Clara realized how completely her understanding of the war had shifted. 6 months ago, she had been coordinating the communications for a panzer division, fighting desperately against the American forces. Now, she was being offered a job in an American ice cream parlor, trusted to work among civilians who saw her as a potential asset rather than a dangerous enemy. I accept, she said without any hesitation. When do I start? Monday morning. Peterson will drive you to Salina and introduce you to the owner. Congratulations, Miss Noman. You're about to become the first German POW ice cream server in the history of Kansas. The irony was perfect. The woman who had once helped to coordinate the German resistance against the American forces would now be serving American families the very frozen desserts that symbolized everything her own homeland had lost during the war. Monday morning arrived with the Kansas heat and the surreal experience of riding through the American farmland in Peterson's truck on her way to her first day of civilian employment as an enemy prisoner. Clara was wearing a clean camp uniform and carrying identification papers that authorized her to work in Selena's Main Street ice cream parlor, under the supervision of Mr. Frank Miller, Peterson's cousin. Frank has been running that parlor since 1938, Peterson explained as they drove past prosperous farms with modern equipment and well-maintained buildings. He is looking forward to having someone who really understands the techniques of ice cream production. He says that most of his summer help can scoop, but they cannot create new flavors or troubleshoot the equipment when there is a problem. The town of Salina was bustling with Monday morning activity. Shoppers, business people, and children on their summer vacation from school. Clara noticed how well-dressed everyone was, how abundant the displays in the store windows looked, and how normal civilian life seemed, despite the ongoing war in the Pacific. Miller's ice cream parlor was situated on a corner, with large windows, cheerful awnings, and a hand-painted sign that advertised 16 different flavors daily. Inside, the space was clean and bright, and it was dominated by display freezers that were filled with more varieties of ice cream than Clara had ever seen in one place. "You must be Miss Noman," Frank Miller said, greeting her with the same casual friendliness she had experienced throughout her time in American captivity. "Peterson has told me good things about your skills in the kitchen. Are you ready to learn the civilian side of the ice cream business?" For the next 8 hours, Clara learned how to operate the commercial serving equipment, memorize the flavor, descriptions and prices, and practice the customer interaction skills that were demanded in American retail. The work was pleasant, dignified, and surprisingly challenging as she adapted her military precision to the standards of civilian service. "Table 6 would like a banana split with extra whipped cream," called out Mary, a teenage employee who treated Clara with the same casual respect she showed her other coworkers. "And the family at table 3 is asking about the German ice cream traditions. I told them you would know about that." As the day went on, Clara found herself serving American families who were curious about her background, but who showed no hostility toward a former enemy who was working among them. The children asked her about German fairy tales. The parents inquired about European dessert traditions, and the elderly customers shared their stories about the German immigrants who had settled in Kansas generations ago. "Miss Noman," asked Mrs. Patterson, a regular customer according to Mary, "my grandmother used to make something called Eisbaum for special occasions. Do you know anything about German frozen desserts?" "Certainly," Clara replied, pleased to be able to share a positive aspect of her heritage. "Eisbaum is similar to what you call a baked Alaska. It is ice cream that has been molded with cake, covered in meringue, and then briefly baked. It was very popular for celebrations before the war. Could you make one for my daughter's birthday party this weekend? I would be willing to pay extra for the special preparation." As she agreed to create a traditional German dessert for an American family's celebration, Clara realized how completely her role had been transformed. She had gone from being an enemy communications officer to an American ice cream server, from someone who was fighting against these people to someone who was enriching their community with her cultural knowledge and her skilled service. That evening, as she rode back to the camp in Peterson's truck, she reflected on a day that would have been impossible to imagine during her time in the military. She had worked alongside American civilians, had served their families, and had been treated as a valued employee rather than a dangerous prisoner. "How did it go?" Peterson asked. "Better than I could have ever hoped," she replied with honesty. "Mr. Miller said I could work full-time through the summer if I wanted to." The prospect of spending the next few months serving ice cream to American families felt both surreal and appealing. A peaceful, productive way to wait for the end of the war while also contributing something positive to the community that had shown her such unexpected kindness. August 1945 brought the news of the atomic bombs and the surrender of Japan. But for Clara, the end of the Second World War came with the quiet routine of serving ice cream to the American families who were celebrating the peace. In Miller's parlor, she watched as the customers received the news of the victory, with a joy that was tempered by relief, understanding that these people had never once doubted their eventual triumph. "Miss Noman," Frank Miller said, approaching her during a lull in the afternoon, "I wanted to discuss your future here. With the war ending, the prisoner repatriation will be starting soon, but I would like to sponsor your immigration application, if you are interested in staying." Clara paused in her cleaning of the serving counter, considering an offer that represented a complete transformation from an enemy prisoner to an American citizen. Around her, the ice cream parlor was humming with a peaceful activity. Children choosing their flavors, families sharing sundaes, and teenagers on dates, all discovering that a former enemy could serve their desserts with both skill and courtesy. "You would sponsor me, even though you know I fought against America? I know that you have served ice cream to my customers for 2 months without a single complaint," Miller replied in a practical tone. "I know that you have increased our German dessert sales by 200%, and that you can troubleshoot the equipment that stumps my regular staff. That is what matters now." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Patterson with her daughter's birthday party. 12 children who were expecting the German ice bomb that Clara had promised to create. The dessert had required a special preparation and ingredients that Miller had obtained specifically for the occasion. "It is beautiful," gasped the birthday girl as Clara presented the molded ice cream creation, which was topped with a perfectly browned meringue. "It looks like a castle made of snow." As the American children celebrated with a German dessert that had been prepared by a former Wehrmacht officer, Clara recognized the symbolic completion of her own transformation. She was no longer serving the families of her enemies as a prisoner who was earning her wages. She was contributing to their community as someone they trusted with their celebrations. "I accept your sponsorship offer," she told Miller quietly. "This feels like home to me now." That evening, as she was writing her weekly letter to her sister in Munich, Clara struggled to explain her decision to remain in America. How could she describe choosing a job in an ice cream parlor over a return to her devastated homeland? How could she convey the sense of dignity she had found in her civilian work among her former enemies? "The Americans have offered me a permanent residence," she wrote carefully. "I have found meaningful work here, and I believe I can contribute in a positive way to the post-war reconstruction efforts." The euphemism would satisfy the camp's censors, but it could not capture the reality of her choice. She had chosen abundance over scarcity, generosity over revenge, and the radical American belief that former enemies could become productive citizens through the simple act of proving their worth through honest work. September 1945 marked Clara's transition from a prisoner employee to a civilian immigrant, as her legal status changed from that of an enemy POW to a resident alien who was seeking citizenship. The transformation felt both gradual and profound. It was the same work, with the same customers, but under fundamentally different circumstances that reflected her growing integration into American society. "The town council has approved your permanent work permit," Miller announced, showing her the official documents that made her employment legally equivalent to that of any other immigrant worker. "You are officially our head ice cream specialist now, with full civilian wages and benefits." The title amused her, from a Hauptmann in the Wehrmacht to a head ice cream specialist in Kansas. But the work brought her a satisfaction that her military service never had. Creating frozen desserts brought joy rather than destruction, served families rather than a political ideology, and contributed to the prosperity of a community rather than to a national conquest. "Miss Noman," called out young Bobby Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's son who had become a regular customer. "Could you teach me how to make real German chocolate ice cream? My mom says you know the recipes that came from Europe." As she showed Bobby the techniques for tempering chocolate and creating a smooth custard base, Clara realized she was passing on her cultural knowledge to American children, who would now remember the German traditions with fondness rather than with fear. The next generation would associate the German heritage with delicious desserts, rather than with military conflict. "Your English sounds completely American now," observed Mary, her teenage coworker who had become a genuine friend over the months. "Sometimes I forget that you were not born here." The comment pleased Clara more than any military commendation ever had. A sense of belonging, a real belonging in a community that had chosen to embrace her rather than to simply tolerate her presence. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Sergeant Williams, who was now preparing for his own discharge and his return to civilian life. He ordered a chocolate sundae and sat at the counter where they could talk in private. "How do you feel about the choice you have made?" he asked directly. "Grateful," Clara replied with honesty. 6 months ago, I was expecting a brutal imprisonment or even death. Instead, I found a people who showed me what a victory with honor looks like. Any regrets about not returning to Germany? Clara considered the question as she prepared his order with the expertise she had developed. "I regret the war that made such choices necessary. But I do not regret my choice to stay with a people who have proven that enemies can become friends through patience, kindness, and a willingness to judge others by their actions rather than their past." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "That is a very American way of thinking." "Maybe that is what I have become," she said, surprised by the truth of her own words. As he left the parlor, Clara realized that her transformation was now complete. She no longer felt like a German woman who was working in America. She felt like an American who just happened to have been born in Germany, someone whose identity had been fundamentally reshaped by her encounter with a society that was generous enough to offer ice cream to its prisoners and citizenship to its former enemies. Christmas of 1948. 3 years after the end of the war, Clara Miller, she had married Frank's nephew, David, in a ceremony that had made the front page of the Selena Journal, stood behind the counter of what was now Miller's German-American ice cream parlor, preparing holiday flavors that blended European traditions with the preferences of Kansas. "Mama Clara," called out her adopted daughter, Susan, bursting through the door of the parlor with some questions about her European geography homework. "Can you help me to understand why Germany was divided after the war?" As she helped Susan with her homework, which covered the post-war occupation of her homeland, Clara reflected on her own complete integration into American life. The woman who had once coordinated the military communications for the Wehrmacht now coordinated the holiday ice cream production for the families of Selena, who had embraced her as a permanent member of their community. "Mrs. Miller," asked the elderly Mr. Thompson, who had been a regular customer since her days as a prisoner, "could you make that special German Christmas ice cream again? The one with the cinnamon and the real vanilla that reminds me of my grandmother's strudel?" "Of course," she smiled, pleased that her European heritage continued to enrich, rather than to threaten, the local culture. "I will have it ready for you by tomorrow." Through the windows of the parlor, she could see that Main Street had been decorated for Christmas, with lights and garlands that sparkled in the Kansas winter air. America's prosperity had only grown since the end of the war, and the abundance she had first discovered as a prisoner had now become the foundation of her own family's success. "Any regrets?" asked Greta, who had stopped by for their traditional weekly coffee. She had married a local farmer and now managed the most efficient dairy operation in the county. "About what?" Clara replied, though she knew exactly what Greta meant, about choosing ice cream over the fatherland. Clara laughed at the familiar question, which they had asked each other hundreds of times over the years. "I did not choose ice cream over Germany. Greta, I chose the kind of people who give ice cream to their prisoners, who offer citizenship to their former enemies, and who judge individuals by their character rather than their nationality." That evening, as she prepared the parlor for the next day's holiday rush, Clara reflected on her journey from an enemy prisoner to an American citizen. The ice cream that had first symbolized the impossible abundance of America had now become her profession, her contribution to the community that had given her a new identity and a new purpose. "Not even our generals have this," she murmured, remembering her first shocked encounter with the camp's freezer. But now she understood that the real revelation had not been about the ice cream at all. It had been about discovering a society that was so confident in its values that it could afford to be generous, even to those who had fought against it. As she locked the door of the parlor and walked home through streets where the Christmas lights reflected off the snow-covered sidewalks, Clara realized that the abundance she had once found impossible to believe had now become the foundation of her own American dream. And every day when she served ice cream to the families who had accepted her as one of their own, she remembered the moment she had first found it hard to believe that enemies could be trusted with such a luxury. and had discovered that a trust that is freely given creates a loyalty that force never could. In a small town in Kansas, former enemies had become family, and the sweetest victory of all was the daily proof that kindness could triumph over conquest, that generosity could defeat hatred, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply a freezer.